The date is March 5, 1770. Snow covers the streets of Boston. A crowd surrounds 9 British soldiers on the steps of the customs house. They're shouting, throwing ice, daring the soldiers to fire. The soldiers are terrified, outnumbered. Their fingers rest on triggers. Then, from the darkness, someone screams, "Fire!" In the next 10 seconds, 5 men will die. A city will explode in rage, and the path to American independence will be set in motion. But the story doesn't start here. It starts decades earlier, with empires fighting for control of a continent. It involves taxes, riots, street brawls, and a funeral for a boy that shuts down an entire city. And it ends in a courtroom, where one of America's founding fathers will do something that could destroy his reputation forever: defend the very soldiers accused of murder. This is the true story of the Boston Massacre. What really happened, why it happened, and how one cold night in 1770 changed the course of history. A young boy lies dead in the snow. He's 11 years old. 2,000 people will attend his funeral in 5 days. His name is Christopher Sider, and right now, in February 1770, he's bleeding out on a Boston street. The man who shot him is a customs official named Ebenezer Richardson. The crowd outside Richardson's house had been throwing rocks through his windows for hours. They were angry. They wanted him gone. Richardson grabbed his musket, pointed it at the crowd, and fired. The boy fell. The mob surged forward, dragged Richardson from his house, and nearly beat him to death before authorities intervened. This moment, this dead child, this rage, it sets everything in motion. In 5 days, Boston will hold the largest funeral in its history. The entire city will shut down. And in the crowd, watching, will be British soldiers who've been stationed in Boston for 18 months. They'll see the anger. They'll feel it directed at them. And they'll know that something terrible is coming. Rewind 60 years. It's 1710, and England is building an empire. Ships leave London packed with settlers, soldiers, and supplies. They cross the Atlantic and claim land in America. But England isn't alone. The Dutch plant their flag in New York. The French control Canada and the Mississippi. The Swedish stake claims in Delaware. For decades, these European powers circle each other like wolves, fighting wars on American soil that have nothing to do with the people actually living there. By the 1750s, England has fought 4 major wars in North America. The most recent, the 7 Years' War, ends in 1763. England wins. France loses Canada. But winning costs money. Lots of money. The British Treasury is nearly bankrupt. Someone has to pay for all those wars. And the British government looks across the Atlantic and says, "The colonists. Every piece of paper in America must now carry a stamp from London." It's 1765, and Parliament has just passed the Stamp Act. Newspapers, legal documents, playing cards, marriage licenses, even dice. The tax isn't huge, but it hits everyone who matters. Lawyers need stamped paper for contracts. Newspaper owners need it for printing. Tavern keepers need it for licenses. Merchants need it for bills of sale. Suddenly, the most influential people in American society are all paying a tax they never agreed to. And that's the problem. Not the amount. The principle. Back in England, there's a law from 1689 called the English Bill of Rights. It says that levying taxes without the consent of Parliament is illegal. But the American colonists don't have seats in Parliament. They have no voice, no vote, no representation. So when Parliament imposes this tax, it's doing exactly what the Bill of Rights forbids. The colonists see this clearly, and they start to organize. The phrase spreads like wildfire through every colony. No taxation without representation. Town meetings are called. Pamphlets are printed. Merchants agree to boycott British goods. In Boston, a group called the Sons of Liberty starts intimidating stamp distributors, forcing them to resign. The movement grows. By November 1765, not a single stamp distributor is left working in the colonies. The Stamp Act becomes unenforceable. Parliament is stunned. They expected grumbling, maybe some protests. Instead, they face organized resistance across 13 colonies. So they repeal the Stamp Act in 1766. The colonists celebrate. They think they've won. But Parliament isn't done. They immediately pass the Declaratory Act, which states that Parliament has the right to make laws binding the colonies in all cases whatsoever. It's a threat, a warning, and within a year, Parliament proves they meant it. In 1767, they passed the Townshend Acts, taxing glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea. The colonists realize nothing has changed. British warships appear in Boston Harbor on a gray October morning in 1768. Soldiers march off the boats in formation, red coats bright against the overcast sky. There are 1,400 of them. They march through the streets with drums beating and flags flying. They're here to enforce the new taxes and protect customs officials. The people of Boston watch in silence. This is occupation. Foreign soldiers on their streets. And the soldiers aren't guests. The colonists are required by law to house them, feed them, pay for their supplies. It's called the Quartering Act, and Bostonians hate it. Imagine, you're a tavern keeper. Soldiers walk in and inform you that you'll be housing 6 of them. You have no choice. You have to give them rooms, meals, firewood, and you have to pay for it. The resentment builds immediately. Soldiers and civilians start to avoid each other. Then, they start arguing. Then fighting. The soldiers don't want to be in Boston either. Most are young, poor, and far from home. They're paid almost nothing. To make extra money, they take side jobs during their off hours. They work as laborers, dock workers, and rope makers. This creates a problem. Boston's workers now have to compete with British soldiers for jobs. And the soldiers, desperate for money, will work for less. By early 1770, the tension is suffocating. Civilians insult soldiers in the streets. Soldiers respond with threats. Fistfights break out. One soldier is beaten so badly he loses an eye. Another is thrown into the harbor. The officers try to maintain discipline, but they're losing control. Everyone knows it's only a matter of time before something breaks. And then, on March 2nd, 1770, it does. Do you want work? That's what William Greene shouts at a British soldier walking past Gray's rope walk on March 2nd. It's a long, narrow building where workers make rope for ships. The soldier, thinking Greene is offering a job, says yes. Greene sneers and says, "Then go clean my outhouse." The soldier's face darkens. He walks toward Greene. Another rope maker steps in. They start shoving. Within seconds, more workers and soldiers pour out of nearby buildings. Fists fly. Clubs swing. The soldiers are outnumbered and beaten back. They retreat, humiliated, to jeers and laughter. But they don't forget. That night, they return with reinforcements. Another fight breaks out. This time, the workers drive them off again. Over the next 2 days, more skirmishes erupt at Gray's rope walk. Soldiers promise revenge. Workers dare them to try. The entire city is a powder keg. And on March 5th, someone lights the match. Blood runs down Edward Garrick's face. It's the evening of March 5th, 1770, and a British soldier has just struck him with a musket. Garrick is a young apprentice, barely more than a boy. He'd been walking past the customs house on King Street when he saw Captain John Goldfinch, a British officer. Garrick started shouting, accusing Goldfinch of not paying his wig maker. Goldfinch ignored him. But the sentry standing outside the customs house, Private Hugh White, didn't. White told Garrick to shut his mouth and show respect. Garrick kept yelling. White snapped. He stepped off his post, walked up to Garrick, and struck him in the head with the butt of his musket. Garrick staggers, blood streaming. He screams. People start gathering. Within minutes, a crowd surrounds Private White. They shout insults. They throw snowballs. White backs up to the customs house steps, terrified. He loads his musket and yells for help. Inside the barracks nearby, soldiers hear the commotion, and Captain Thomas Preston makes a decision. Captain Thomas Preston is 40 years old, and he's been a soldier for 20 years. Right now, he's listening to a mob scream for Private Hugh White's blood. Preston knows that if he doesn't act, White will be torn apart. So he orders 7 soldiers to follow him. They grab their muskets, fix bayonets, and march toward King Street. The temperature is below freezing. Snow covers the cobblestones. Their breath mists in the air. When they arrive, the crowd has grown to over 50 people. Maybe more. It's hard to tell in the dark. Preston and his men push through the mob and form a semicircle on the customs house steps. Their backs are to the building. Their bayonets point outward. The crowd presses closer. More people arrive every minute. Someone has rung the fire bell at the old brick meeting house. It's a signal for fire, and people pour into the streets, confused and angry. They see soldiers with bayonets and assume the worst. The crowd swells to 300, maybe 400. The soldiers are surrounded. A man named Crispus Attuck stands at the front of the crowd. He's 47 years old, over 6 feet tall, and built like a sailor. He's of African and Native American descent, and he's been a free man most of his life, working on whaling ships and trading vessels. Right now, he's holding a cord with stick. Others around him hold clubs made from ropemaker's tools. The crowd is chanting, "Fire! Fire! Fire!" They're daring the soldiers to shoot. They throw snowballs, chunks of ice, oyster shells. One piece of ice hits a soldier in the face. Another strikes a musket. The soldiers stand firm, but their hands shake. Their breath comes in clouds. Captain Preston stands in front of them, trying to keep control. A local merchant named Richard Palms pushes through the crowd. He gets close to Preston and asks, "Are you going to order your men to fire?" Preston shakes his head. He says he will not fire. Why would he give that order when he's standing right in front of his own men in the line of fire? Palms seems satisfied. He steps back. The crowd keeps chanting, "Fire! Fire! Fire!" From somewhere in the darkness behind the soldiers comes a shout, "Fire!" At the exact same moment, something heavy strikes Private Hugh Montgomery. Could be a club. Could be a chunk of ice. Montgomery falls. His musket clatters on the cobblestones. He gets up, confused, angry, terrified. He aims his musket into the crowd. And he pulls the trigger. The shot echoes off the buildings. For a moment, everything stops. Then the other soldiers start firing. Not together. Not in a volley. One at a time. Pop, 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 7 shots in total. Captain Preston screams for them to stop. The soldiers freeze, smoke still rising from their barrels. They look at each other in horror. They hadn't heard Preston give an order. They'd heard someone shout fire from behind them. But they'd already pulled their triggers. And now, in the snow, 3 men lie dead. Crispus Attuck is the first to fall. 2 musket balls hit him in the chest. He dies almost instantly. Next to him is Samuel Gray, a rope maker. He's been hit in the head. He's dead before he hits the ground. A 17-year-old apprentice named Samuel Maverick staggers away from the scene. He's been shot in the stomach. He'll die the next morning. 2 more men, James Caldwell and Patrick Carr, are also hit. Caldwell dies on the spot. Carr will hang on for 9 days before succumbing to his wounds. 6 others are wounded but will survive. The crowd pulls back in shock. Then the shock turns to rage. They start to surge forward again. More soldiers arrive. The entire 29th Regiment is mobilizing. The situation is spiraling out of control. If the crowd attacks, the soldiers will have no choice but to fire again. The street will run with blood. And then, from the old State House, comes Lieutenant Governor Thomas Hutchinson. Thomas Hutchinson is one of the most hated men in Boston. He's a loyalist, a supporter of the king, and the colonists blame him for many of their problems. But right now, he's the only person who might be able to stop a full-scale massacre. Hutchinson pushes through the crowd and climbs onto the balcony of the old State House. He raises his hands for silence. The crowd slowly quiets. Hutchinson promises them that there will be an inquiry, a full investigation. Captain Preston and his men will be arrested. There will be a trial. Justice will be done. But they need to go home. Now. For a long moment, the crowd doesn't move. Then, slowly, they begin to disperse. People carry the bodies away. The snow is stained red. By morning, the entire city will know what happened on King Street, and they'll be calling it a massacre. The next morning, Captain Thomas Preston and 8 soldiers are arrested. They're taken to jail and held without bail. The people of Boston want them hanged. Pamphlets flood the streets describing the massacre. One version says the soldiers fired without provocation into a peaceful crowd. Another version says the crowd was armed and violent, and the soldiers feared for their lives. Both sides are telling completely different stories. Paul Revere, a local silversmith and member of the Sons of Liberty, creates an engraving. It shows British soldiers in a neat line, firing a coordinated volley into an unarmed crowd. Captain Preston stands behind them, sword raised, clearly giving the order to fire. It's powerful, it's emotional, and it's not accurate. But accuracy doesn't matter. The engraving spreads through the colonies like wildfire. It becomes the story. The soldiers are murderers. The British Army is a force of oppression. And Boston is a city under siege. Meanwhile, in London, the news takes weeks to arrive. When it does, Parliament is divided. Some members are horrified. They worry that the massacre will spark a full rebellion. Others are defiant. They insist the soldiers were justified and that the colonists are ungrateful subjects who need to be kept in line. But in Boston, the immediate question is practical. What do we do with 9 men sitting in jail? The trial can't happen immediately. Tensions are too high. The city needs time to cool down. So the governor postpones it. Weeks pass. Then months. The soldiers sit in jail, waiting. And Boston has to make a decision. Will they give these men a fair trial? Or will they hang them to satisfy the mob? The answer comes from an unexpected source. A lawyer named John Adams. John Adams is 34 years old, short, stocky, and argumentative. He's also one of the smartest legal minds in Massachusetts. He hates the Stamp Act. He hates the Townshend Acts. He's written pamphlets denouncing British tax policy. In other words, he's not a loyalist. But he believes in something more important than politics, the law. When Adams hears that no lawyer in Boston will defend Captain Preston and his men, he's troubled. Every person, no matter how hated, deserves a defense. That's the foundation of justice. Without it, a trial is just a lynching with paperwork. So when he's approached and asked to take the case, Adams agrees. It's not an easy decision. Taking this case will make him wildly unpopular. His legal practice will suffer. His family might be threatened. But Adams believes that facts matter more than passion. And if he can prove that these soldiers acted in self-defense, then the law must protect them, even if the mob wants blood. Months pass before the trial begins. By October 1770, Boston has calmed down. The 29th Regiment has been withdrawn from the city to keep the peace. Captain Preston will be tried separately from his men. His trial comes first. The courtroom is packed. Every seat is filled. People stand in the aisles and crowd near the doors. Preston sits at the defendant's table, pale and thin from months in jail. John Adams sits beside him. The prosecution lays out its case. They call witnesses who say they saw Preston give the order to fire. They describe the chaos, the screaming, the blood. They paint a picture of cold-blooded murder. Then it's Adams' turn. He stands and begins to dismantle the prosecution's case, piece by piece. He calls witnesses who were standing right next to Preston. One man swears he had his hand on Preston's shoulder at the moment the shooting started. Preston never gave an order. Another witness testifies that the shout of fire came from somewhere in the crowd, not from Preston. Adams argues that in the darkness, the noise, the confusion, the soldiers acted on instinct, not orders. The jury deliberates. It doesn't take long. When they return, they deliver their verdict, not guilty. Captain Thomas Preston is acquitted. The courtroom erupts. Some people cheer. Others shout in anger. Preston is led up quickly, before the crowd can turn violent. But the trial isn't over. 8 soldiers still sit in jail, and their trial will be even more contentious. A month later, the soldiers' trial begins. John Adams once again leads the defense. This time, the stakes are even higher. These men pulled the triggers. These men killed 5 people. Can Adams convince a jury that they were justified? He starts by addressing the jury directly. He tells them to set aside their anger, to look at the facts, to remember that these soldiers were surrounded by hundreds of people, that they were pelted with ice and clubs, that they feared for their lives. Adams calls witness after witness. One admits he was in the crowd that night carrying a sword. He'd planned to use it. Another describes the ropemaker's clubs, heavy and spiked, designed to beat wool but just as effective on skulls. Adams presents testimony showing that the crowd was not peaceful. They were armed. They were violent. They were threatening to kill the soldiers. One witness describes Crispus Attucks raising his stick and swinging it at a soldier's musket, trying to knock it aside. Another says Attucks was shouting, "Kill them! Kill them!" Adams isn't trying to vilify Attucks. He's trying to show the jury what the soldiers saw that night, a mob that wanted them dead. Then Adams calls his star witness, a man who was standing in the crowd near Captain Preston. This man testifies that someone behind the soldiers shouted fire, and that Preston immediately screamed at his men not to shoot. But it was too late. The first shot had already been fired. Adams now moves to his closing argument. This is his moment. He looks at the jury and says, "Facts are stubborn things. Whatever our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence." He reminds the jury that the law is clear. If a person's life is in danger, they have the right to defend themselves, even if that person is a British soldier, even if the people threatening them are Bostonians. The law doesn't care about politics. It cares about facts. And the facts show that these soldiers believed they were about to be killed. Adams sits down. The courtroom is silent. The jury leaves to deliberate. Hours pass. Finally, they return. The foreman stands. The courtroom holds its breath. The verdict: 6 soldiers are acquitted. 2 are found guilty of manslaughter, not murder. The 2 convicted soldiers are branded on the thumb with the letter M. It's a mark that will follow them for life. If they break the law again, the punishment will be severe. But they won't hang. John Adams has done the impossible. He's saved the lives of 8 men that half of Boston wanted dead. The trials are over, but their impact is just beginning. John Adams' legal practice takes a hit, just as he expected. Some clients leave. Some friends stop speaking to him. But others see something different. They see a man who stood up for principle over popularity. A man who defended the law even when it was unpopular. This reputation, this image of fairness and integrity, makes Adams valuable to the revolutionary cause. If even John Adams, the man who defended British soldiers, believes the colonists are being oppressed, then maybe the revolution isn't so radical after all. Maybe it's justified. Over the next few years, Adams becomes more involved in colonial politics. He's elected to the Massachusetts legislature. He writes essays denouncing British policy. And in 1774, he's chosen as a delegate to the First Continental Congress. The Boston Massacre fades from the front pages, but it never really goes away. Every year on March 5th, Bostonian,